Thanks and welcome to the last session. Glad you all could stay. I think it's my pleasure to introduce this panel. It's a great panel we're able to put together with people from industry and academics. From industry, we have people representing smaller startup companies, people representing larger established companies. So I think that will be a great perspective. The format for this will actually be a Q&A session. I have a list here of questions. If I get through my list of questions, you all didn't do your job. Okay, because I think this hopefully will just be a startup, and hopefully this will generate a lot of discussion in this audience. And so first I'll introduce each panel member, let them give a little background, and also talk to a little bit about where they work. The first panel member, Dr. Dan Tomso, is Chief Scientific Officer at AgBio, where he's working at building a new industry-leading discovery and development platform. He's an inventor of over 40 granted and pending patents in the field of agricultural biotechnology and computational biology, and also author of numerous peer-reviewed publications. Dan?
Hello, are we on?
Yes.
Yeah, hi. Well, thanks for inviting me, Alan and the rest of you guys. So, yeah, I think you talked about me, and I can answer additional questions if people really want to know that. I can tell you a little bit about AgBiome, which is what's up on the screen. We are a startup company, just under 2 years old at this point. We're a venture-backed company, so you can see some details up there with how we're put together. We have an unusual structure, or somewhat unusual for our industry, in that we're organized as an LLC. That creates a lot of flexibility in the kinds of business deals we can do, and I'm happy to discuss that. Our technical focus is in 2 market areas. We're looking for both biologicals, that is microbes and other products that can be used directly in the field, and also pulling genes out of those to produce transgenic traits. And there's some details on the market there, but most of you probably have heard a little bit about that. The team is an interesting group of people. We've worked together in different capacities over the years. Many of those roles were here, but some were in other areas. We have a lot of experience pulling products out of these kinds of resources, and we are a product-focused company. So the last thing to mention is that really what we're trying to do is provide leads to partners typically that can then go on and enter the commercial development process. So we're really not a fee-for-service company. We're really interested in partnerships. So this kind of discussion about licensing is really at the core of our business.
Okay, thanks. The next panelist is Dr. Andy Renz. Andy is Vice President of Business Development for Benson Hill Biosystems. He's an experienced leader in technology evaluation and business development in the agricultural biotechnology area. He has more than a decade of international experience in business development and is responsible for numerous licensing, service collaborations, and international consortium agreements around the world. Andy?
Thank you. Also, thanks for the organizers to give me the chance to be here on that panel. So, yeah, that's what Alan just said. The experience I have actually from a large company side, I brought that over to the small company, Benson Hill Biosystems. And we call ourselves the photosynthesis company, recently trademarked it. And that already shows you we are focusing on improving photosynthesis and thereby increasing crop yield. That is clearly the focus of that company. And this is a very young enterprise, so we are maybe 1.5 years old effectively, and start from a deep knowledge on photosynthesis. That's what you see on the upper middle there. This should be photosynthesis machinery, C4, C3 plants are indicated. And really starting from there and a really unique transcriptomics computational biology platform, we identify lead genes, which we test first in a kind of fast cycling model plant system, which we have for the C3 and C4 crops. From there, of course, we have state-of-the-art phenotyping. I should mention that we are more or less a spin-off of the Danfoss Center in St. Louis, and are also represented here in RTP. So phenotyping, of course, transfer into crops. So we do crop transformation ourselves. For difficult crops like sugarcane, we find partners. We already have a deal with the leading sugarcane company in Brazil, and develop products. And from, of course, our learning curve is hopefully steep. So we will also, from there on, design new experiments to identify new leads. And our focus is, starting from there, developing products in partnership with big ag biotech or ag players, but also with medium or with specialty crop companies.
Okay, thanks, Andy. Our next panelist is Dr. Kelly Sexton, who is Director of the Office of Tech Transfer at NC State University. Dr. Sexton directs all aspects of the Office of Technology Transfer, including administration of the $2.5 million Chancellor's Innovation Fund. She has served as an executive in residence at NC State Poole College of Management High-Tech Startup Creation Program and currently serves as the Blackstone Entrepreneurs Network Steering Committee.
Great.
Kelly?
Thank you. So my job's pretty easy because most of you have probably already heard of the little university down the road called NC State. We are the flagship engineering and technology university for the UNC system. We're also a land-grant university. And given our focus on STEM, it's unsurprising that we're the #1 land-grant university in the country in terms of the percentage of STEM degrees we award. We have the 4th largest undergraduate engineering program in the country, and we're also big. We're the 4th largest university in our 4-state region. What my office is tasked with, the Office of Technology Transfer, is managing the variety of the intellectual property assets that emerge from our university. So we do this by proactively scouting for new technology opportunities, supporting their further development wherever possible using resources like the Chancellor's Innovation Fund. We do it by encouraging partnerships with industry, and on occasion we do it by forming a startup company to help further the development of that technology.
Thanks, Kelly. Our next panelist is Dr. Martha Dunn. Dr. Dunn is Senior Licensing Manager at Syngenta, specializing in negotiation and managing biotechnology agreements from early stage research through product development, supporting Syngenta's R&D development pipeline for seeds and traits. She has over a decade of experience negotiating agreements with universities and institutes, startup companies, and also major competitors in the biotechnology, biofuels, and agricultural industries. Martha?
Thank you, Alan. So, I guess being the first large company, since Al didn't get to talk yet. So Syngenta is, as I kind of have up there on the slide, a large multinational specializing in crops and seeds through crop protection and with trait technology. I'm representing the local site here, which is the biotech unit. It's one of those where, again, working with a lot of folks here, we're here to look at technologies, try and find kind of traits, other enabling tools that can help us bring yield, and I'm sitting here thinking of all the buzz phrases, and I'm trying not to use them all. It's all about yield as we kind of got there, but it's one that we realized too, our research is a large investment, but we're not going to do it all ourselves. So partnerships and licensing is incredibly key to our company. We need to look outside. We need to form strategic alliances. We need to be scouting. We need to be assessing opportunities. The group that I'm in is part of our legal IP and licensing, and it's all about framing what is the key IP. How do we structure these collaborations? How can we extract value and bring the products to market so that we can all sort of benefit? We're certainly there up against our competitors. We will work with them too when needed. But it's a very important thing, and you know, while we do these collaborations and such, as we get to the topics here on licensing, it is about how do we share value? How do we look at what it is we're making? What is it we have to invest? What is it? Who are we working with? Be it the small startup company or the university, and how do we get that to something that we all want to be going down the same path, take products to market, and we all benefit?
Thanks, Martha. Our last panelist is Dr. Al Chris. Al Chris is Global Strategic Alliance Manager for Traits and Genomics at Bayer. He has over 25 years of experience in the ag biotech sector, where he has primarily been involved with technical project management and development of R&D collaborations. Al's also worked with Monsanto and for BASF Plant Sciences. Al?
Thanks, Alan. So yes, I'll just first start to tell you a little bit about myself, and not so much maybe about myself, but about the ag biotech industry. And I started actually with a company called DeKalb Genetics back in 1992. And throughout all that, the whole focus of the industry, as we've heard already, is delivering value through seeds. Basically, a large part of that is delivering value through seeds or through the types of crop protection chemicals or crop enhancements that we can add through our chemical business. Within Bayer, you're all familiar with Bayer as the aspirin company. But what we also do is we have three major areas of focus today. One is crop science, which I'm here representing. Another is healthcare, and another is material science. Now, you might have seen recently in the last month that we're going to be floating off our material science business and focusing on our crop science and our healthcare businesses. So thinking again about focusing in on the life sciences. And that's what we do. Within Bayer Crop Science now, with respect to alliance management, as Alan indicated, my role is in strategic alliance management across crops global. I represent the traits and genomics portion of our business. We have another fellow who focuses in on small molecules, which is our chemistry, and a third individual who focuses in on biologics. So through that, what we're trying to do is to be able to bring all that, any technology opportunities in, and our role is to perform assessments of those technologies, both with intellectual property, have to do an IP assessment, make sure there's a good fit with our portfolio or the commercial side of our business, and then making sure we have good, sound science. Those are the types of things that we do. So that's what I spend most of my time on doing, is looking for opportunities or else evaluating opportunities as they come to us. And those opportunities come into us either through tech transfer offices or other venues that will bring those, offer those technologies to us, or from our scientists who see something and see the value there, or also from our own scouting activities, from opportunities, get-togethers such as this, when we find that there might be something that we're interested in. So we're open to all kinds of things from that perspective.
Thanks, Al. Thanks, panelists. Okay. If you can just bring up the title slide again, just to keep that up. Now's your time. I will start with a question, but like I said, hopefully you all will join in. So, panelists, what particular differences or unique issues, if any, are found when licensing for ag biotech in comparison with other types of businesses like we might have heard today?
Start this in?
Yeah, start.
Go down the
What
side.
do you think? Well,
Very
yeah.
orderly.
Okay.
So we're much more orderly than other industries.
Well,
There are a couple things that are obviously different about ag. I mean, one of the things is just the fact that there are only really 6 sort of big companies, right? The market is not as diverse. If you look at something like pharma, where there's dozens of companies that are actively doing deals. This is also true in the startup space. There are very few ag startups for reasons that are pretty complex, having to do with investor appetite and just kind of the nature of the market. I think that there's been a lot of success in those areas, but it's just not the complex, rich market that you see in other areas. So that's one of the big issues. The nature of ag deals is also a little bit different in some cases. I can talk more about that, but the kinds of products that need to get out the door and the timelines on some of those can be very long. So I think those things play a role in finding people who understand that and have done deals in ag can be challenging.
Other members want to chime in?
Sure, I'll chime in. So one of the great things about being in technology transfer at a university like NC State is you get to work across many different industry sectors. So one day we may be doing a software license with a Samsung or a Google, and then the next day I'm talking to Martha about a transgenic plant perhaps. So there are some key differences here in this sector, of course. One of them is you may have significant regulatory hurdles, and that way there can be largely a correlation with pharma deals where you're talking about, a multi-year partnership really to bring a technology to market. Some other aspects, we are at the end of the day talking about food. So we have to take, our obligation to the public good into mind in our licensing practices. They may be also pretty complex. We may have utility patent rights, we may have plant patents, we may have plant breeder rights. We may have tangible plant materials as part of the license, so you have to think about some of those complexities as well. The regulatory situation, are we talking about, USDA and APHIS, or are we going to be talking about FDA regulation? So you really have to think about all of these matters when thinking about the ag biotech sector.
And just to add on top of that, a lot of it is when we look at licenses, what dollar figures are we talking about? Agriculture, a lot of it is commodity, and it's having to remember that. We need to make some money, it's a large investment, and it's not that we're trying to be cheap or anything, it's just, it is a different value proposition. And we're certainly willing to talk about that, but it can be very challenging when you're starting to get to those first discussions on licensing something, of what sort of milestones or royalties, and when are ag companies looking to pay them? Because again, it's a lot of risk we're taking on, a lot of uncertainty working in the plant arena, and again, we're not trying to be difficult, but it has to work for us too. And if it gets to be too expensive and it's trying to shell out more money than we can have, we will just stop the product. We will put our resources elsewhere. It has to be in a cost-effective way, which for those who don't work in ag, I think it's a little shocking to them as to what that is, and to get to Dan's point, what those timelines really look like. You likely may not be at your place of employment by the time that transgenic event is going to be commercialized, which I know for some universities that we've talked to, that's been stunning for that.
Actually, just to interject there, I heard sort of as an unofficial figure that there have only been 2 royalty streams ever collected in ag, ever, from sort of small company, big company deals, that no small company ever made it long enough to actually collect royalties. So that's not as bad as it sounds, because they tend to get bought, right?
They do.
They get
tend
bought
to
to
roll
buy
up
out
into
their
someone
rights.
else. But there is
But there's a timeline
Yes.
thing there that's
Yes.
very strange.
and funny thinking about some of that, and I would think the number's a little bit larger, but not much. Yeah.
Well, maybe there's almost a good aspect, a positive aspect on ag. Although I think at least theoretically, the failure rate in the later stage of development are much lower than maybe in the pharmaceutical area. Almost, because in the end, not too many products really make it to the market, and the reason is because, traditional or modern and latest breeding technologies are, of course, competing to whatever is developed. That is a problem, and in the end, there are so many unknowns in bringing a technology, also which has been licensed maybe, to the market, so that in the end, maybe the dropout rate is still high, also for no good reasons, right? And then another aspect is that trading, and also 2 areas where maybe the regulatory landscape is more complicated. So Europe is important, and something, let's say, genome editing technologies, which is certainly safe and non-GM, let's say, in the US and in other areas. If you have to exclude Europe, you run into problems for a product.
I'm going to talk just about 2 of the things we've already heard about already. One is when we think about the differences maybe between pharma and what we do, is that they have to remember that it's been only 20 years really since ag biotech from engineered crops have been on the market. It's been less than 20 years. And there's been a lot of change in that time, as one might imagine. and it takes, I mean, the fastest thing that I think ever made it through was maybe 6 or 7 years from basically concept out through regulatory.
For GMs, yeah.
Yeah, for GMs, if we're talking GMs. So if we're talking about that technology, and you think about that in the latter part of through the 90s and through the early part of the 2000s, everybody was focused in or had programs going in the area of quality traits, enhancing corn grain for use in animal feed, for example. Now nobody does, because you can't recover that value back in really out of those commodity grains. So those are the types of things that if we would have been focusing in on things back then, a lot of that stuff just didn't, things have changed a lot. Now it's everything that's involved in a large part, big data, digital farming and those things. And I just want to touch base, because sometimes you might not think about this if you're not familiar with too much about ag. But if you think, I'm going to talk about the valuation of these technologies. And if you think about a box of cornflakes, so think about a 12 or 16 ounce box of cornflakes that cost maybe $2.50, $3. So that's about a pound of cornflakes. A bushel of corn is 56 pounds, and at its best, it's going to sell for $7.50, $8. That's what the farmer is getting. That's what the farmer gets for that bushel of corn. So there's the margins that he's getting are very small, right? So those are the types of things, and all that has to be built into whatever technology is going into selling that seed and whatever he's using to produce that.
Can we hijack and say one thing that's great about
I was gonna
ag
say,
each?
we
'Cause
just
we
have
just-
something positive.
Oh, you ask us about challenges, so you
Yeah,
gotta
let's
Yeah,
check
I
out.
did.
but no,
indeed.
there's great stuff too.
But we all work in ag because we like, I like it, it's great. It's a market that will never go away. It's really important, so when you're working on stuff, it matters. You feel like you're doing something that's meaningful, which is a big part of being happy in your work. The technology impacts right now are absolutely impressive to see. So, we have to produce something like 50% more food on the same amount of acreage in the next 10 or 20 years, depending on who projects that. So there's no question that we need these technologies. So the appetite in the industry is tremendous for this stuff. So there's a lot of opportunity to really, not only make an impact on feeding people, but to do a great business deal. So if you like to do that kind of thing, it's one of the best industries in the world right now.
And I guess to add another point is we were focusing a lot, I think, on GM traits, which there is uncertainty. There's a lot you can protect on the product, so it's attractive from the commercial view. But kind of thinking of the last session and genome editing and other things we can do, we do need to be flexible. When I started doing this 14, 15 years ago, there was a model of what that business was. And then we've watched those agreements go, even if the small companies aren't still here. But the models have changed, and we need to be flexible. So where a lot of the focus was a GM trait, how do we identify that lead? Now there's other things we can do. But if the technologies get priced out of what we can do, we'll fall back to the next available one, because it does take a long time to lead in. But we are looking, what is the better way to do this? Because to Dan's point, it is a world that has to be fed, and the resources are getting less, and it needs to be done in a sustainable way. And we're all conscious of it, and we're all out for the same thing, but we're going to have slightly different approaches. But to try and cost things out and be unreasonable or unrealistic in terms you have, we will move on to the next thing, because there's other things that need to be done.
Thanks, that's fantastic. I do have one question already out here.
So, project what it's going to be like in RTP since the big three from Europe have moved here and Monsanto has a big presence here. What do you think the environment for startup companies and so forth is going to be in this area for agriculture?
Thanks. I'm supposed to repeat the question because he's recording this and can't capture it. So please correct me if I didn't capture it totally. So project how the environment here is going to be in the next few years, given the fact that the big three are here and that they've pulled actually a lot of their European presence into the park, and how that's going to impact, or what potential impact that might have on startup companies. Did I capture that correctly? Okay.
I think it has a very positive impact and effect. As you look at Benson Hill Biosystems, in fact, it's a spin-off of the St. Louis-based Danforth Center, and that's where also a good portion, actually the majority of our research is. But we have not only an office but also a lab here, and that's because all these people, like our CEO, like me, and others, are here, and also our customers, our partners, potential partners are here. So, here is really not the place where you grow corn and where agriculture really happens in the US, but as you say, here is a lot of talent.
The talent is huge, and I'll just say that, I mean, that's and what we get from the universities here. A lot of people will come out of here, and people move around, well, at least among between Syngenta, Bayer, BSF, even Monsanto here, people move around.
Except me.
Yeah, people are moving around. I mean, I've worked for Monsanto basically through a legacy company. I've worked for BSF and now at Bayer, and I find it very exciting to be able to have those kinds of opportunities to move around, because all three of them are very different.
And I would just interrupt into the panel that one of the things in our first teleconference that Dan brought up was nowhere else probably can you get this panel than here because of the presence of these companies here.
Yeah, this is absolutely a great town for startups in a lot of ways. The best things are the talent pool. There's plenty of people who not only are scientifically sort of trained, and there's people kind of emerging at all levels from the universities, but there are people who know the business. So you can find a guy like these or other people and just pull them out of another company maybe and go to a small company. The problem that this town has fundamentally for startups is actually on the money side. So there's not a very rich venture community here. And you don't have the kind of concentration of resources that you have in San Francisco or Boston. And so there's some auxiliary stuff that really needs to be there in most cases to put a venture group together or some other funding mechanism. It's better, there's more attention for this area, and I think this has been really helpful, but it's certainly not a strong city for that compared to those other cities. So that's probably the biggest challenge.
Yeah, and one aspect I think of having so many large companies in the area as well is that things that should be licensed to existing established companies can be licensed to them pretty readily because we already have the contacts here. So when we feel the need to do a startup in that space to move a technology forward, ideally it's one that really is appropriate for startup company formation. And so maybe our idea is that will help with the investment side because it really is a good platform opportunity for a startup. And working at NC State, I can say we're really fortunate. Our College of Ag and Life Sciences is incredibly engaged with the local industry, and so that makes our job a lot easier. It provides great opportunities for our students. They're doing internships at all of the companies represented here, and it really helps to create that long-term relationship when they hire our students. The downside is it's really hard to keep the tech transfer office staffed with the right expertise. So we've seen our folks go on to Syngenta, FMC, Bayer Crop Science in the last few years. So that's an unforeseen challenge of having all these companies here. So if anyone has suggestions on how to manage that.
I realize we didn't answer the question though. Yeah. Nobody projected, so I'll project. It's going to be fantastic. So there's a few shortages. There are things like greenhouse space that are sort of critical for ag. Those look to be finally getting addressed. So there will be incubator space and sort of accessible greenhouse space. I think there is a need for more of that stuff. Provided those things come in play, there's no reason that this won't continue to grow. I mean, it's already indisputably the best city in the world for ag biotech, right? There's nobody else that's close. And the pace is escalating, so I think that'll be even more trend. So.
Okay, great, thanks. And I had a question from Joanne.
I think it'd be interesting to hear a little bit about, in your different situations, the roadmap. There was some reference earlier about when documents have to start. And I would, paper that you sign with a partner? Is it a simple NDA, is it more complicated than that? And you could just, without going crazy, but it, it'd be interesting to hear what some of those steps are likely to be in the licensing process for the organization.
Yeah, so the question is, what are the different steps in the licensing process? Where does it start? Where does it progress to?
It's pretty much, it's pretty much the same. We start with usually a non-confidential discussion to make sure that we've got the appropriate level of interest and the appropriate focus. And then offer you then into a CDA. And then you start working out term sheets. Basically that's it. And I can tell you that the way that Bayer works is that my role is to help identify those opportunities, get these assessments done. And as we move forward, what we do is we actually have other people who are another group that's well, much like at NC State, right? That another group that's more involved in the transactional side of those activities of getting the actual agreements done. So that's how that works. And I'll also tell you that for later stage technologies, we also have additional people like my colleague Mark Hilbrand's here, who is focused more in on later stage technologies that are really almost ready to go to market. So he's more focused in on that from the business development side.
So being the person that is more on the transactional side, to carry over from Al's comments. So yeah, and ideally it is a simple CDA that we start with after having those disclosures. And it's interesting because if you're finding you're doing 3 or 4 turns just to get a confidentiality agreement in place, everything else is likely going to be fairly complicated. And so it does give a gauge of what any discussions downstream will be like. But again, the nice thing is, kind of looking here with all the people here, we all tend to know each other and we're not starting with a completely clean piece of paper. We have relationships. We, can have those discussions on the stage the technology is and have those be kind of fruitful and we're on the same page. If it is somebody that isn't experienced in this, you do tend to go a lot slower and really want to outline the terms.
Yeah. Okay. Should I give another answer? Or this was
Yeah,
this a
no,
question?
that's fine,
Okay.
yeah.
From a small company perspective and having the big company background, interestingly, a CDA can be as fast as 1 day. This is unbelievable but true.
Yeah.
Should be
So
1 day.
It should be 1 day, exactly. But I have other anyway. And from there on, it's important that, of course, the term sheet is detailed enough to really cover all the issues and all the problems. If it is just too superficial and half a page, it doesn't help at all because then you get stuck at the contract stage, right? That's, I think, general knowledge. And also something which I learned in Benson Hill Biosystems before I joined, it's really essential that you explain what you change, otherwise the other side may fall into a situation of, just total silence or ignorance. If you make changes, really explain it to the other side, otherwise it costs a lot of delays, which is really unfortunate. And I really like, often enough, it's not a pure license, but there is some research to be done, and often enough, and it really makes sense, particularly for the university side, if this is part of a collaboration between the company and the university. That always makes the deal much more attractive for the university, and it brings, if that makes sense for the company, I really like this. Structure-wise, revenue-wise, for the university, well, there's a different situation. A big company can say, all right, here we have the royalties on the product, right, and we share that with you, and before there are a few milestones, etc. Of a small company, but the model is to partner with a bigger one. Obviously, it is sharing our own license income, which should be fine. And I think the advantage of working with a small company is that the likelihood it will be shelved is 0, or it's very small. Yeah.
Great.
I can give you another list of processes, but I think you got it, right?
Yes.
Sure. So on the topic interested to hear what the role of software is and what you look for when evaluating software partnerships specifically.
So again, that's, just to repeat the question, the evaluation of software in particular and, sorry, the role of,
What is the role of software in meeting your strategic goals?
and what is the role of software in meeting your strategic goals and how do you evaluate that?
So, software is crucial. Evaluating it. So, and I can't speak for how the smaller companies do it, but we do. We have a bioinformatics group, and it's all about how to do that. And it does get challenging because the software is kind of that platform foundation. I can't say that we necessarily value it based on the research that comes out. It's not part of the business case that we do when we're looking at, how you apply enabling technology to breeding or some of these others. So it is an interesting sort of dilemma because in a way we probably do find ourselves a little bit caught. What did we do for other software agreements and what needs to be developed and what is on the shelf that we can pull and what's the implications in that. So I think that that's still fairly dynamic for us.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, it depends is one big thing. That's all we can say. I mean, because some stuff has to be developed. We have to develop it internally.
Yep.
And other stuff, yeah, whenever we can pull those things, so it's tough.
I'm going to be provocative. I actually can't think of anything in my experience where a software deal was worth very much money. There are lots of enabling bits of software that you'll take on a regular commercial license, and there's, things you need to use in the laboratory. And I'm aware of deals where there was a company that had some proprietary software as part of an R&D effort, right, or a discovery effort. So there was a software role, but the deal only really got some magnitude because of the activities that were going around that to produce, germplasm or to produce a trait or something valuable. I actually don't know of a straight software deal that was worth a ton of money, with the exception of Climate Corp, right? I mean, so some of those kind of big data things are emerging, and so is it possible that there could be a sort of data deal? But I think of that more as a data deal, right, rather than a software deal.
And often small companies actually have some special algorithms, here with Benson Hill, this is certainly how to make sense out of all these transcriptomic data and construct networks. So that's kind of something which we have intrinsic. But still, I mean, there are new things where we want to grow into, like, making sense out of field phenotyping data and putting this all together with these ground truthing and other data. So here software plays a role, but I guess it comes, as you said, then in conjunction with other deals, with collaborations.
Yeah. I guess my perspective's a little different. We do software licenses, some of which can be pretty impactful and pretty valuable. Does anyone in the audience have a Samsung cell phone? So
I'm not in the audience.
thank you,
Yeah.
thank you. It's okay. Thank you. You have NC State software on your phone. It's protecting the data, but that's kind of outside of the scope of this ag biotech focus. But we do a good deal of work there. In terms of evaluating, because it's coming from a university, we have to look for the open source dependencies and make sure it's something that even can be licensed. What kind of cleanup do we have to do before it's ready to be licensed? And then I guess just an anecdote, but back in the 70s, there were a group of USDA researchers on NC State's campus wanting to, figure out how to analyze the reams of agricultural data they were getting. And so they recruited some statistics professors, and a few years later, a little company called SAS was born. So, ag software can go to exciting places, I think.
Yeah, and I think just to follow on sort of what Dan was saying, with digital farming, who knows?
Yeah.
I think
Right.
that's a big unknown.
I think it's a great area. I think it hasn't happened so much yet, but I think it could. But it'll be more of a data thing, right, than a straight software thing. So.
Depends. Yeah.
So other questions? Yeah, Joy?
Talk more about what's digital farming.
Digital farming, anyone want to take on?
That's these guys.
Yeah.
Big guys.
So basically, I mean, if you think about, I'll just tell a little bit of an anecdote. I like to tell stories, so sorry, but back in the early '90s, after the Berlin Wall came down and the Cold War ended, a lot of the data, the GPS data, started becoming available. The satellite stuff started becoming available. So we started getting GPS, started getting things that we could use in our cars and that. And you had guys out in the field in, Iowa who had taken their IBM AT computers and sticking them in their combines, basically. So they were taking advantage of that information to be able to know where they were in the field. And now we're at the point where, there's all kinds of stuff that goes on. So guys are out now with 48-row planters, and they're planting different amounts of seed and putting them, when they lay down their fertilizer and that, they're putting different amount of fertilizer down. Things like that are focused more in on relatively small areas of land to focus in that stuff. And then Climate Corp, we heard about before, it's a highly predictive, basically weather risk management software to know in a given area, what's the weather going to be there? What's that going to be like? What should I plant there? What should I apply to that plot of land in order to get the most yield out? Because it's all about yield. So it's driving huge amounts of data, and it's now everybody's coming in there with all kinds of stuff. We have the stuff in our cars, we have the GPS in our cars and all that. If you could see what's inside one of these combines now, it'd just blow you away. I mean, it's pretty cool technology and a pretty cool application of all those data that come in and all that data management.
Are there questions for the panel? Back in the
Jacob.
back?
So, biotech traits have been around throughout the life of a patent. The original traits are starting to come off patent and can start to be seen as commodity traits by some. As we're talking to startups and to majors, what is your perspective on how these off-patent traits potentially can be used by entrepreneurs or other players? Is there freedom to operate there? Are there aspects of the market that will limit that? Or is this going to be seen, as we see in other areas, with generic products that can then be applied in the marketplace?
Again, I'll try to summarize that question. The impact of some of the first traits coming off patent, will that make things into commodity traits? And how will that influence seed businesses down the road? Is that a good summary?
That's a great question. This is something that we've all probably talked about at different times in different companies, and I don't think anybody knows. There's a regulatory burden associated with carrying a trait, and making a new event, even with an off-patent gene, still has a lot of cost associated. So I don't know that you could pick it up as a small startup and get all the way to, say, where you're going to sell things. The other problem is, of course, you need to have germplasm to sell it in, right? So it would almost become a licensing play if you could put together a package of off-patent traits that filled a niche in somebody's portfolio. It could happen, but then you're going to be up against competition. They could do the same thing, right? So it's been a little hard to figure out how you would actually get into the market in a way that made sense for a small company. I'm not to say it couldn't be done. I just haven't seen the model yet.
And I guess from the large company view, I mean, the impact is potentially huge, and we're all watching it, and every major company has something at play. And it's beyond just this thought that this is mine and I don't want you to have it. It is a lot, again, it gets back to stewardship, and it's getting back to acceptance of this technology. And if it's not being handled well, if the stewardship isn't done, if you're not dealing with any of the IRM or other things, or if weeds get out of control, how it's used is so important to all of us up here, because having that go awry out in the farmland, it hurts all of us. So it's something that we are being mindful of, and how do you do this, and how do you do it in a productive and sustainable way. So it is challenging, and it's something that, we go through the hurdles of having acceptance of this technology, which has been through more testing and is safer than the food that you go put in your microwave in the plastic container, but we're still having to address it, and it's still coming under scrutiny. So you know, we're all very careful. We're all trying to promote the value of this and what each of us are trying to do in feeding the population we have here. So, you know, we don't have a great answer for it, but this is why we're so careful as to how we proceed in doing this, because we want to be everyone to accept what we're doing, but realize there's checks and balances for good reasons.
And I'll just say that brings up so one of the things that all of us are very cognizant of is the public acceptance of a lot of this technology, you know, because you hear how bad GMO crops are, and people will talk about this stuff with no basis for it. So what we face is, you know, to a certain extent, in a certain part of the public, I'm going to get on a soapbox here, so I apologize for that. But in a certain portion of the public, they just aren't interested in science. They just don't want to accept any type of science. And there was a thing flying around on Facebook the other day about how citric acid is made by mold. You know, it's made by fermentation, and it doesn't come from citrus fruits. So therefore, it's no good. So I'm waiting for the shoe to drop when some of these anti-GMO activists learn that some of the oxygen they're breathing is being produced by genetically engineered crops, and to see what they do about that. So I mean, but that's the level of science that you have to the level of lack of science they have to deal with, quite frankly. So that's one of the biggest challenges I think that we really do. Well, I shouldn't say a biggest challenge, but it is a big challenge that we have. So
Well, it does actually go into the valuation question,
yeah, that
right?
goes into evaluation.
Because,
yeah.
you know, you have to, that regulatory burden is influencing the price at the final,
Correct.
you know.
No,
that
a
you
lot.
can-
Yeah.
Big part of the
Yeah.
price equation.
Yeah. Yes, in the back corner.
So, I mean, just following up on that, I feel passionately, and I think probably most people in here do, passionately agree with your stance on that. But given that there is a sizable portion of the population who either don't want to or just plain don't understand those facets of, for instance, GM. So, like how, you know, it's clear that it's going to have to be a GM world in the next 10 years, or we're not going to feed the population. So how, you know, are there, you know, obviously in your roles, but are there particular movements towards trying, you know, how does that need to change?
I guess the question is how do we change public opinion to accept GM crops?
And I think
yeah.
as an industry, we're all trying to have a positive influence. I mean, I can speak for Syngenta, you know, adopted this good growth plan, which is all about giving a positive light to what we're doing. It's hard because I agree with the comments here. The public kind of is shut down. They just, oh, no, it's bad. You know, I don't want it. And that's a hard hurdle to get through. So we're trying with the very positive approach. And we'll see. We'll see where the changes in climate, the drought, where is that? And what is the technology that's going to allow these crops to grow and thrive? And it's not just here in the U.S., it's worldwide. And how do you get that impact to be seen?
And I'll just put a plug out for a website called gmoanswers.com that provides, basically an industry-supported effort to address these questions that anybody can go in and ask a question, and then they're addressed by knowledgeable people. Let me just put it that way.
And I think a lot of people find, you know, overuse of fertilizers, chemicals to be more troubling than GMO. So I think if the industry can emphasize how technology enables them to use less chemicals in the food supply, that may be a story that resonates more strongly with consumers.
And I have one.
Okay, well,
Yes.
there are, for example, here in the U.S., there is, I think it's called U.S. Farmers and Ranchers Association. This is an organization which speaks the right language to really reach the public and the consumer. And I think it's supported by all of the big ag biotech or ag solutions players. And I think that's the way to do it, to not to manipulate, but to really kind of educate and tell the public the truth. Has not so much to do with licensing, but that's certainly an effort which all of the big players support.
Then just a plug for entrepreneurship. One of the consistent interwoven arguments about GMO is also an argument about big ag per se, right? And with no implied criticism of my panelist friends here, you know, I like to point out to friends at bars that, you know, we are trying to compete to provide more solutions to maybe level the playing field a little bit in ag so that there are more providers and some of this interwoven story of non-competitive practices can go away. So.
Other questions, or do I go back to my list? There we go, yeah.
Somebody had brought up earlier, this morning about urban agriculture, and, you know, what are your thoughts and involvement in that area? You know, does it make more sense to increase your surface area of farming rather than try to force a higher yield out of a certain smaller location? And, you know, you're talking about GMOs, if you get these out into some of these more localized areas, rather than out on some land that people are completely disassociated with, they've never seen to, they've never been, you know, getting them out in front of people, when I say people, I mean the public, you know, do you see that as kind of, I don't know, an interface to interact with them to, you know, be a little bit more open and willing to accept GMOs since they're kind of, now they're a solution to a problem rather than the problem themselves?
Yeah, I'm not sure how to paraphrase that question, sorry.
What
But
are y'all's involvement with urban agriculture, and do you think that's a good way to kind of interface with the public, rather than it being this place they've never been to, or, you know, farm they've never seen? How do you think that'll help?
so urban agricultural interface with a GM public acceptance. It's, again, a little bit off of licensing, but
Yeah, right. Also it is certainly an upcoming big trend. Also urban agriculture or vertical farming, I think, plays in the same direction. It will help, and it will come in the metropolitan areas because you bring the products immediately. You actually have them already at the consumer, right? This is, I think, it will not really feed the world, but it is a big trend, and it will happen. I'm quite sure this is relevant. Well, honestly, it's maybe even an opportunity for a GM, because if you are kind of contained, no, it should be easier to go. Well, I think this is the only connection which I see. It will come, and GM will feed the world, and this, yeah, okay.
I don't have any licensing commentary on it at all. I don't sometimes understand all the math behind it because I don't know how you get enough photons in a tower to grow plants. So, but that maybe we can talk about that afterwards. It's more of a technical topic.
other questions, or do I start back to my list? Yes, Belcher?
Maybe I try to throw out a question. Maybe by 2050, the population is supposed to double. That means we need to double the grain yield. I mean, you guys, what do you think? What kind of a strategy you have, and what we should do to achieve that goal? Otherwise, we will be starving to death on the summer.
So again, strategies to
Right,
to address
strategies.
population growth, and yeah, again, a little bit off.
And the
topic.
strategy is to increase yield.
Go ahead.
Yeah, right, and those are the numbers that we're all looking at of how do we do this, and where can you get the yield, but where do you get the product acceptance? So, you know, my company does it sort of by regions. You know, you have your IAMI, you have your APAC, and other things, and what technologies do we try to deploy? And acknowledging that it takes you 10 to 15 years to get that product out there to the market. How do you look into the future for it? But the regulatory world is very dynamic. The things that we thought of 15 years ago that we'd be able to do haven't necessarily materialized. So it is having to get smarter and faster and think globally.
And we're able to, like here in the U.S., in the Corn Belt, for example, we've been able to increase yields pretty dramatically over, over the course, at least over the course of, well, my lifetime, which is longer than a lot of people in here, but it's over the course of my lifetime, yields have increased dramatically. And where there are opportunities to increase yield are actually where a lot of that population growth is going to be occurring. I mean, it's in a lot of these other areas where corn yields, for example, in certainly in China, are nowhere near what they are here. So, and that's where there's going to be a lot of growth that goes on, for example. So as there are opportunities to get technologies out there that are going to increase those yields in those areas where they just are very low today. But the technology might be available, but it's having the FTO, the freedom to operate in those areas, and not only from IP and all that stuff, but regulatory acceptance and all that stuff that really is a big challenge.
And I don't think anyone thinks there's one silver bullet solution. I think, you know, we're going to have to, you know, use all the tools and technologies at our disposal. And yield is a prime focus of the folks on the panel, but it's probably not the whole piece. You know, another example of a place to look at is reducing wastage, reducing spoilage. So what efficiencies can we extract in going from the field to the table to reduce that? There's an example of a technology from NC State's College of Ag and Life Sciences that actually delays the ripening of fruit. And so this is called Smart Fresh. It's used on apples, around half of the apples in the U.S., bananas, and it's used in you know, over 20 countries around the world. And what you have here are whereas apples used to have a limited shelf life and a lot of them would spoil before they could be sold, that's been extended by months and months without having to raise the energy output by overcooling the warehouses. So there's a lot of efficiencies like that. You know, that's just one example, but we've got researchers working at NC State and, you know, universities, especially land-grant universities around the country, focused on, you know, working on efficiencies throughout the system.
Yeah, and I think there's a huge appetite for more entrepreneurship, for more funding in university research. I mean, sadly, the history of this industry has been poor in that regard. There's not been a steady increase in funding. I think we're seeing more attention now, but there's a need and there's an appetite, and I'm sure that, you know, Bear or Syngenta could tell you that if a good idea appears on the startup radar at a university, there's a home for it in the ag companies. So get out there and do something. You know, that's the answer.
Right, and it was actually not really said, but I think everybody knows it's not just GM. Ne? It is agricultural practices. Ne? This is a digital or precision ag. It is biologicals and smart use of chemicals. And honestly, I think it's also hopefully to reduce a little bit the regulatory burden or a kind of the costs, because they could actually be much lower than they are. That is really not science. That is more about international collaboration of the regulatory authorities, you know, because deregulation costs don't have to be 50 or 100 million. They could really be almost by a factor of 10 lower, and that helps to feed the world, right? To bring products into more markets.
And just to kind of go off on Dan's comment of the large companies, we're not going to do that. You know, a lot of that innovation that isn't core to what we're doing, we're not going to invest in that. And that's where we look for others, and we look to collaborate and look, and probably like Bear, for exactly what Al does in his job, what are those opportunities? What are kind of the seed things that either need money, or what work's been done that is an idea that then we can help take forward? And that's exactly where I think all of us look to collaborate with people who have those innovative things. But they just need to get to that point where then we can work and collaborate and do something with it.
And just, you know, one more point on that. I think we need to remember the importance of having these decentralized land-grant universities that can focus on local environmental conditions and generate local varieties for that region. A great example here was, you know, the sweet potato industry. The crop they had been using was beginning to fail, wasn't having good disease resistance in our state, yields were down. Researchers at NC State developed non-GMO, traditional sweet potato variety, the Covington, and it's now 90% of the crop that's being grown in the area. That kind of research won't happen at a large company because it's focused on, one geographic area, but it's something that's really important to keep yields up. Every state really needs to have, be able to have these land grants focused on creating good varieties for that region's climate.
And it's more than just that. I mean, we draw on the land grant universities all over the country to do things like field trials, right? Because as a startup, we don't have a giant infrastructure of field sites that we can use, but we can go to NC State and they have a plot where they can test something, and Iowa State can do things, and so all those sort of smaller resources where they can do things to help small companies are really important. So, and it's the only country in the world, I think, that's quite as strong in that stuff. So.
Thanks. A question here?
Yes, we're talking about a lot of regulatory and the burden of the regulatory. So in your opinion, what change on regulatory would be needed to make the process of new license, easier, or we have more new things coming to the market?
Okay, so the question is, what changes in regulatory structure would allow for more fruitful licensing and more throughput, I guess? Is that summing it correct?
Yep. Well, I think Andy nailed one of them. International cooperation would be great. Right now, it's ridiculous that you have to produce sometimes wildly different packages for every country, and grain in particular is pretty fungible. It goes all over the place. And so you have to deal with these problems of every country having their own standards. I think having it be more science-based and less sort of political would be tremendously valuable, although it's a bit of a pipe dream at this point, but that's what needs to happen. It has to be really based on scientific data so that it's straightforward to understand the requirements and to produce them.
And those two things would be huge, because a lot of it is not based on science. It's having to prove a negative in many times and proving it over and over. And each country having a slight different nuance that then you have to go through and create a whole new data package to do that all over again.
I guess that leads to a question I was thinking actually about these international deals. So how are those structured differently than some of these local deals when you're talking about licensing across countries, not just licensing, between NC State and y'all, but something that's bigger and more global in scope?
Well, I mean, there's still, so we still bring things, the thing is that I'll call it the plant biotechnology community is quite strong in the EU, actually. Mm-hmm. There's a lot that goes on there. But the thing is, they don't have an outlet. For them to do a field trial is a huge challenge, not like it is here. So that's it. So, that's what a large part of the opportunities that we have, actually, people want to get some field data. So that's one of the things that they look for, I think, in deals, is to generate some data along those lines. If that's what, I don't know exactly what you're, but those
I was just wondering, challenges, especially different countries, whether or not it's licensing is even respected sometimes. As far as use of
right, and you'll
technologies.
have the challenges of some countries are, or even it's the institutes or company you're working with. Some are more sophisticated than others, and they have a better legal structure, and what do patents mean, and how valuable is it, and what sort of protections do you get, and that is kind of on a country by country basis. You're relying on a piece of paper and hoping that there's something more behind it. But that's where I go to my legal colleagues.
And
Maybe. Okay.
for us, if we're considering a technology that we really think has international reach, we have to go with a large player that's going to have the bandwidth and capabilities to bring it to market in a variety of countries because of all of the regulatory hurdles, lack of harmonization amongst different countries. And they're also going to have the drive to enforce patents around the world, and in some countries that's more difficult than others. So, if we're really thinking about international licensing strategies, we're typically having to look at a larger company, for that transaction.
And what I heard how I understood your question was, well, there are some countries where maybe where the science is great, but patent filing is quite poor, and in such cases, as a company, you just have to more establish a collaboration, and the IP is generated within that collaboration, and the company is responsible for it rather than just pure licensing. So if the patent filing itself is poor, then obviously the company itself has to take care of it. I mean, which doesn't mean that the university will be exploited or misused, but simply it's in their own to their own advantage. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks. Was there other? Yes.
At first, I'd like to ask a question, but I think the two shot, that's GMO and non-GMO, especially like the first slide, the slide show you work on both sides, GMO and non-GMO. So I don't think I want to ask it, so what you think about the both future something. It's two shot, but in other words, that okay, we have similar technique and to make product, similar product with the two pathway to make it, non-GMO and GMO. So which way you like to license, but it's two shot. So when I want to ask, another way, look at your slides, you said you work on both, right? And when you write down this part, have you ever think about what's the difference of this part, why you want to put both on that slide? And what did you see in the future for both sides? So this question not only for Andy, for all of us.
But maybe I can start.
So yeah, technology,
Okay.
both GM, non-GM, which pathway do you take? What goes into that decision-making process? Is that something?
By the way, I want to tell, I'm working on the GMO, I'm not against the GMO. Just want to-
Yes, understood. Yeah. Yeah, well, I mean, from a small company perspective, you want to use the platform and in the end, the resources you have, which are funded by the investors, as broadly as possible. And I mean, there are some crops which are really not yet established as GM crops, and if some of our approaches are certainly possible, at least potentially in a non-GM way, so that's why we proceed with it, right? Honestly, how well protectable this is a question, and we don't know the answer yet today, but we still want to go that route. The GM is clear. I mean, then there are the other non-GM ways to do something, which is simply using chemicals or biologicals, right? That is clearly another route, which is quite unproblematic. Also, you know, you can still protect it, at least the chemical part. Biologicals, Dan is more competent to answer it.
Well, we look for market opportunities, so there's an appetite in the market for certain kinds of products, and you know we have an obligation to our investors and to our employees to work on projects that we think will make a product that can earn money for our investors, right? I mean, it's a business. So to some extent, you're constrained by the market. Now, once you understand that, you can be creative about different ways to tackle a problem, as Andy says. So if we're concerned about, you know, sweet potatoes, or we're concerned about rice, you know, we can look at a GM strategy, and there are certain problems that those are the best solutions. And then there are other problems where maybe you can use a microbe, or you can use a different approach, a breeding approach. And I think there are people trying to do all of those things.
And I would just add, on top of that, I mean, there may be situations where you can envision even, because the non-GM route will be faster to market. You don't have all the regulatory hurdles, you're not going, potentially, it depends on a number of factors, including the crop you're in. But it's one of those with the GM, if it's in a market that you expect it to be accepted, it's easier to protect, it's easier to track. It's one that there's ways to identify it, which exist in non-GM, sort of native trade as well, but you can't, it's a little bit harder in order to do that, to know exactly where your product is and be able to know who has your product to make sure it's in the hands that you want it in. So it's one of those, as you can envision, to capture a potentially large market, you could anticipate coming forward with a non-GM with the intent of replacing it with a GM when it becomes available. So you get to capture some of the market, get it out there, and then have your follow-on product. But different factors in play in the time it takes you to get there and what happens to the market while you're going down your research phase.
Other questions for the panel? Okay, I had one, and actually this sort of goes to something Andy brought up. How do you balance the desire of the researcher to publish with the desire of the industry to not publish, to patent and not disclose where possible in agreements?
Well, I always say that from a university's perspective, think of faculty as independent agents who happen to be working at the university. The Tech Transfer Office cannot and has no desire to inhibit the publication of our faculty. So what we try to do is be very proactive, make sure they know who we are, where we are, and what the value could be to them, to their research program of working with us to disclose intellectual property to our office in advance of publication. So we really, have to just incentivize them to work with us. There are times where small delays in publication could be acceptable to the university. For instance, if the company is sponsoring research, then it's only fair for them to have the opportunity to review publications in advance and perhaps to provide comments, but they don't have editorial control. That's just not something that's going to be compatible with a university setting.
Could you define small delays?
Reasonable delays, 60 days
We
to
can get 60. How
review,
about
and then
90? Can we get
30
90?
days for the patent filing, so it goes to 90, as you know. There's a reg on that, and we can't go beyond that without going up to the Board of Governors for permission. So, yeah.
It's different at every university, honestly, and even within some universities, the tech transfer offices can do different things, that some of the ones that are state associated are more
Or they pretend they
constrained.
can.
Yeah. Well, some of them are tied by the state, right? For example, I heard that you have to go to the governor's office or something, right? But private universities are more flexible. The one thing I will say on this topic is what you don't want to do is get into a partnership with an academic group and not discuss this in advance. Because there's nothing is worse than an unexpected outcome. You get into there and suddenly there's really valuable IP created, and then you have a problem with potentially, pre-publishing that and jeopardizing the IP. So you have to talk about it, and you have to reach a solution before you start the collaboration. It's really important.
And maybe even beyond pre-publishing, I think it's also important, and here talking to the universities, of course, I mean, it's obviously clear that it shouldn't be pre-published. And sometimes publications are hidden. So if somebody gives a talk and presents data, that can actually already be a publication. Here, no, I think but it's worth maybe, and that's important, I think a task for the tech transfer offices to educate the faculty, even not to file a patent too early. Because, I mean, it really does make sense only if you have enough data to have a solid IP created, and then publishing, right, afterwards.
And I guess I'd add, I mean, I appreciate where Kelly's coming from, and while lots of universities are different, some of them have number of consistencies. I think the way we view collaborations is we accept and appreciate that there are things that the university is going to dictate. And ideally, it's a conversation that we have, that our researchers have with the university researcher to understand why. It's one of those, the less ideal is that you're chasing publications. You're finding out they want to publish, and then the clock starts ticking because somebody pulled out the agreement. The ideal is that there's enough interaction with that researcher on a research level that you kind of know something's coming up, and there's already a conversation without having pulled the agreement out to see what the clause says, to say, hey, you know what, if we could get more data, and then you can get a stronger patent because you're just going to have this data, which it's not really going to have that much. And they may say no, and then we're back to looking at the agreement and start counting away on the number of days. But our view is if you're not having to look at the agreement all the time, you have a good relationship.
If we don't have to talk, and it's just the researchers talking, that's the best case scenario.
And quite frankly, I think most programs, most academic programs, I'll look at Dr. Crisper back there, often has in mind a publication strategy along those lines as well. So it's a pretty good, not precisely, but has a pretty good idea about what's going to flow. And if that can be, keep the agreement, not the agreement, but keep the participants, the collaborators updated on what that is. That makes it a lot easier.
Fair treatment of IP ownership and rights
Yeah,
is
exactly.
also very beneficial.
Yeah.
If the academic party feels like, okay, I'm gonna participate in any value that's generated, they're a lot more inclined to be patient with the publications than if it's all going over the fence.
Yeah.
Great.
Thank you for
Thanks.
that.
We've completed our time, so I'd like to thank again the panel, and I thank the audience for their questions.
Can we ask the panel to just stay in place for just a moment? We just have a couple of concluding remarks, and then we'll all have, be able to move to bed. Okay?
I think he's got them off.
I must say it's quite a pleasure to follow such an esteemed panel, and I'd have to say the panel actually stole quite a few of my talking points, but I think made them very, very well, so forgive me if I repeat a few things. But to begin with, the North Carolina Biotechnology Center is very happy to be able to host this event for the third time. We think this, again, as was stated earlier, really is a unique community where we can cover so much of life sciences in so many unique ways. And that's obviously the mission of the North Carolina Biotech Center, to help support this industry, support job creation, and really our programs focus on these interfaces in the marketplace from ideation, innovation, commercialization, development, through to the market. That to us is the ultimate goal and success, and you've got some fantastic examples here. I am part of the Ag Biotech team here at North Carolina, at the Biotech Center. We're a small team in the center focused on the sector where we combine biotechnology and agriculture. So again, I'm very pleased to have been part of this process and to see so much of our world represented along with so many other sectors and areas of science and research. So today was an exciting and fun and interesting day for me, and I hope it was the same for you. The life science landscape here in North Carolina, again, is really quite unique. The diversity that you find here, you certainly see the heart of it here in the Research Triangle Park, but it really spans the breadth of the state. If you think back to this morning, our colleagues from further west, from the Piedmont Triad, and in particular, the research partnerships coming from the Kannapolis Research Campus, really, I think is a great example of the fantastic work that takes place across the state, and we had, I think, many representatives from across the state. Some of the themes that I heard today, certainly collaboration, partnership. We think this is really fundamental to the culture here in North Carolina. You could, I think, draw that back to our southern roots. We like to talk to each other. We like to work together. But again, sitting here in the heart of Research Triangle Park, there's truly a legacy of building world-changing research and technologies on collaboration. Again, if we go back to, I don't believe he's here anymore, but Bradley this morning from Research Triangle Institute International, really the cornerstone of the park, and an incredible example of how collaboration from private to public industry, government agencies, universities, how in North Carolina we have truly brought that to life and been a model for the world for decades now. And as we see this continues to grow and again is really some of the heartbeat that you find here at the Biotech Center. Additionally, translational work. We like research because it's fun, it's interesting, we like to ask those questions, but by golly, we want to do something with it as well. And you see that taking place in North Carolina across all of the science-based sectors, whether that's IT, software development, agriculture, life sciences, medical devices. And what we've heard today is these overlap. By having this incredible landscape, we all benefit. We may find that a technology that works for human cell therapies can be truly enabling for plant research and enhancing yield out in the field. And again, underpinning all of that is a culture of innovation. So coming together, trying to solve these global problems. And I say quite often that North Carolina is an important part of feeding, fueling, clothing, and healing the world. And again, you see that woven across the topics we heard from today. So again, I'd like to share the appreciation of the Biotech Center for you coming to take part in this, for us having a role in organizing the event and being a home for this. We love seeing life here in the center, and you really, again, bring this to life. So I'd like to mention a few upcoming events that will echo, I think, a lot of the topics that you heard here today. November 6th, we have our next Ag Biotech Professional Forum focused on big data analytics. So some of the talks and themes you heard today. So please let me know if you want more information about that. It is on our website. And more importantly, we have our 2014 Ag and Biotech Summit on November 17th and 18th in partnership with the College of Ag and Life Science at NC State. I hate to tell you, but seats are sold out. But for those of you that are planning to attend, we look forward to a fantastic event where we'll continue on this conversation. A lot of the discussion around the role of biotechnology in food production, feeding a growing, hungry global population. If you've not yet registered, we have started a wait list. We do believe there will be some adjustments, some seats opened up, but would love for you to join us for that as well to continue the conversation. In that, I appreciate your time. Thank you for BRC for bringing this program here yet again. We look forward to future events. I think Joanne has an open invitation to those of you who are interested in helping to contribute to the planning process, helping to shape the topics and speakers that are featured here. And she, I think, would welcome your interest in that. So thank you all very much. And thank you, most importantly, to our panelists.
One more handsome face and then we'll go.
All right.
Thanks again. I'm not sure that there's anything substantive that I can add to all that has been said so far, but I thought maybe I can make it a little more personal and talk about what I see here. I am a recent North Carolina transplant. I moved here last year after almost 30 years in Ohio, at Ohio State University, another land grant institution, if you will. Professor there for 30 years, and now I moved down here. It's quite remarkable. One of the most remarkable things, which I think came out in the session here today, is sort of this confluence in this area of strengths in agriculture, biology, medicine, information technology, etc. Okay, so I think that is a fairly unique strength, because it really is rare to find that particular combination. You can go to Silicon Valley and you have all the information technology you want. You can go to Boston, you have perhaps healthcare you want, but to have it all together in one place, I think there aren't too many. And as my personal pitch here would be is that sort of the mechanism or the oil that sort of covers across all of this is data. Every one of these areas has to deal with data in various ways, shapes, and forms. And today, it can act as the bridge across all these different disciplines. It provides a way for people to talk to each other, because very frequently when you have two different disciplines that want to work together, and I've done this quite a bit, there's a problem of language. One discipline says something and the other discipline says something else, and they may be talking about the same thing, and there's no real way of exchanging information, if you will. And I think that now, with the advent of universal, ubiquitous data from every single place using sensors and other data collection mechanisms, I think that there's a universal language that's coming up. And again, I think this area has remarkable strength in there with the analytics program at State, a little company that somebody mentioned right around the corner from here, and other assets that are there. I think it's a great place to be. So that's what I would say.
I couldn't have said it better myself. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you,